now introduce Professor Eckhart Beer, who was my lecturer at Canterbury, and was one of my favourite lecturers that I had in social marketing and behaviour change and digital marketing.
One of is not.
My favourite lecturer. Get in the car, go home. And I'm really excited to have him speak with us because I think that what he does really reflects our work, and I feel like he's got a lot to offer. I've actually got a massive list of all of his awards and things that he's done, because if you guys have probably seen from my emails that there's so many amazing things that you've done. So Ekan has a PhD in social marketing and health promotion from the University of Auckland. He is the winning Associate Professor of Marketing in the University of Canterbury's Department of Management, Marketing and Entrepreneurship. He's recently won a National Teaching Award, a National Tertiary Teaching Award, which was awarded in Parliament. Yes, very flash. And was awarded the University of Canterbury's Teaching Medal, which is the highest honour university bestows its teachers. Named in the top 40 under 40 business professors worldwide in Poets and Quants. And he's been seconded to work with international organisations such as the World Health Organization, Association for Consumer Research, and domestic organisations such as the Mental Health Foundation, Canterbury District Health Board, NZTA, and the Health Promotion Agency, and now Toi Te Ora. Really excited to have you here, and I'm sure that he will have amazing things to say. So the other thing is we are going to do a 30-minute question session and a 30-minute presentation. You are welcome to ask questions while the presentation is going as well, but just kind of be aware as well we've got time for questions, and anything you want to talk about, Ekant's happy to talk about it. So yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome.
Thank you so much.
I'll hand over
Thank
to you.
So kia ora, Dr. Katoa, thank you so much for coming along. I appreciate some of you have flown in or driven in from afar, and coming in for a lecture is probably not the sort of thing you get, your jollies out of. So we'll try and make this as painless as possible. I was saying to Sophia when we were talking about this, I did my PhD in this area, we teach whole degrees in this area, I have PhD students completing their theses in this area, and so to try and dumb it down into 30 minutes is going to be really difficult. So I'm going to rush through a couple of really quick things that I think are going to be generic and hopefully useful to you in a wider sense, but then really want to open it up for your korero at the end and your sort of specific questions, and we can bounce some ideas of how that sort of thing can work. So that's the kaupapa of what I want to bring today, and if I kind of go off track, I have a tendency of doing that, just kind of pull me back on track. I mean, that's maybe Sophia's job as well. But I wanted to talk specifically about this idea of health promotion, and why health promotion that is education based doesn't necessarily just cause very little effect on behavior change, but actually can hinder future practices as well. So education, as we know, is much easier than behavior change. Encouraging someone to change their behavior is quite complex, and educating them along that path is quite easy. Unfortunately, it is also somewhat flawed. Knowing something and doing something are so fundamentally different. If you dumb down my 3.5 years in my PhD, I kind of dumbed it down to the reason people do stuff that's bad for them is either they don't know it's bad for them or they don't care. Most of the time, they don't care. There are very few people left who are in their, past their teenager years, into their 20s and beyond, who don't realize that smoking is bad for them. They realize smoking is causing them harm in some way. They just don't care. All right? So the focus has to be on building that salience, making people understand that this is important enough that they care, and unfortunately educating them along the way doesn't always work. And there's a bunch of sociological and societal reasons as to why that is, but we'll touch on that as we go. The government likes reach. The government wants you to reach as many people as possible and make sure as many people as possible have heard that these things are good for them and these things are bad for them. Educating and using education-based messages to do that is usually the easiest and widest reaching way of doing that. So this is why we have lots of ads on TV. This is why we have billboards go up. This is why we have radio ads and all these other things, and they call that health promotion. In my mind, if the ultimate goal is still behavior change, then if you are not changing behavior, if behavior is not changing as a result of that promotion, then it's not necessarily effective. we need to make sure that those promotions translate into actual behavior. Now, the argument could be that that promotion becomes one part of a suite of activities that work in order to encourage behavioral change. In reality, when you look at the data and you look at the evidence, those ads do very, very little with regards to actually promoting behavior, but also there are times where they ostracize people. They make people feel separated from that cause. And so when their GP or their doctor or their whānau come and say, you know what, you really shouldn't be doing that, they've felt these messages that say you are bad, you are wrong, you're doing these things that are evil, and now they feel ostracized by other people as well, and that actually separates them further, and they won't come back looking for support in the future. And this is why, even though you are trying to do something that hopefully will make lives better, it can actually make things worse. So cynical consumers are always going to be cynical. We are seeing more and more cynical consumers than ever before. I don't know if it's a generational thing. I don't know if it's just because there is more access to information out there and people are starting to wonder what information is true or not true. But we are seeing cynicism out there. And just because your doctor says you should do something doesn't necessarily mean people do something. My parents' generation, if the doctor said do this, they would do this. If the doctor said finish your course of antibiotics, people would finish their course of antibiotics. Now it's kind of like, I feel well, I have ownership of my own health, therefore I will decide when I should start and stop this course of action. Or, you know what, I've got some crystals at home and that's worked really well, I'll use those from now on and I'll get better, okay? But the idea that the cynicism towards experts is causing a bit of a difficulty, and that makes our job much harder as well. And this thing called the internet is causing trouble as well. And I don't know if you guys have seen the internet. It's a wonderful place. I teach the digital marketing program as well as the social marketing program at UC. And I often say one of the best things about the internet is that everyone has a voice, and one of the worst things about the internet is that everyone has a voice. Some people shouldn't have a voice. I don't doubt for a second that the people who are saying weird stuff on the internet have always said weird stuff, but now they've got a massive audience, and you're able to find different people who also agree with you, and then you find especially vulnerable populations who buy into this, and we'll talk about why that happens. Knowing something is good or bad doesn't necessarily mean you do it or you don't do it. I know what the speed limit is. I know what the road conditions are like, and if I see a sign that says 50 kilometers an hour, I might edge up to 55. I won't though, because apparently this is being filmed. I was told to film this. I have never gone over the speed limit, even though I know what the speed limit is. I would never, but I've heard some people do. But if you're in a 100k zone and there's no one on the road, you might edge up to 110. Just because you know it doesn't mean you'll do it. Now it seems like a minor thing because the perceived consequences of going 110 seems minor. You know that because you've probably been driving a long time. You know that because you've been on that road for many, many years, and you know the conditions and you know your own skill. But we know that there are consumers out there, we know that there are patients out there who will say, I know my own body, and I actually do better when I have a drink in the morning to help me going, okay? I know, and they will find justification rationale for behavior that you might see as hugely unhealthy. All the evidence says this is wrong, but in their minds, they will believe that more than anything else. And we need to make sure that we convey this in a way that is empowering and encouraging, as opposed to ostracizing, which is what education, the sort of distance-based, I see a sign on a board or on the back of a bus, that is very disenfranchising as opposed to empowering and encouraging. So we'll talk about that as we go. I'm sure all of you know the Ottawa Charter, you know what health promotion is and how it's a multifaceted approach to trying to change behavior. The idea was that all of these things were designed to work together, that building policy, that empowering people, that reorienting health services were all meant to work in conjunction with one another in order to see this happen. The reality is, as budgets get tighter in health promotion and in the health industry, and as things start and pressure is increasing for you to do more and to reach more and encourage more behavioral change with fewer and fewer dollars, everything starts going towards developing personal skills. What can we do to make that person better? Because you know what? Rewriting policy for a city is complicated. Rewriting policy for a whānau is complicating. Reorienting health services to make sure GPs or health professionals operate in a certain way, it's complicated. It's much easier just to tell people, stop smoking, you're having a baby, you're an idiot. All right? Those might not be the messages that you are actually writing, but those sometimes are the messages that are received. How they are received becomes as important, if not more important, than how you intend them to be perceived. Does that kind of make sense? All right, cool. I'm racing through this, like I said. I kind of like to add to the Ottawa Charter and say there's a lot more complexity around behavioral change in particular. And these are the ones that really kick in for me with the research that I've been doing over the last 10, 15 years and talking with a lot of people on the ground level. I should say from the start, I'm more an individual level researcher. My colleague Anne-Marie Kennedy is more a macro level, so she will look at the more macro scope when it comes to social marketing. I look at individual differences and individual change. And so these ones for me in particular, personal ability, oh that's right, whoops. It doesn't have a laser because it's an LCD screen. I keep forgetting that. Personal ability is the one that keeps coming in. If someone feels personally able to do something, they will be more likely to do that self-efficacy sort of side. If you go and externalize your ability and say this is outside of my control, it'll never happen. So if you come to a person and say, you know what, your weight is edging to the point where you are looking at serious health risks in the near future, and they say, it's in my genes, my mother was fat, my father was fat, I can't control it, it's very, very difficult then to say, it's still possible to be healthy, it's still possible to try, blah, 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 because they've externalized the problem, they've externalized the causes, and they're never going to have an opportunity to feel they have an internal ability in order to change. That was always my excuse. My mum's fat, I'm fat, that must be my problem. You're not fat, mum? Oh, shit. And I would always externalize it as a genetic thing, as opposed to, I actually can do this. I was just lazy. Knowledge. We know that there are populations out there that have more knowledge. They have more access to information. They have access to better information, or they have better understanding of the good information out there. The reality is the best information out there, the research-based, the evidence-based information, is confusing. It is separating. It is hard to decipher. It is much easier to decipher a blog post by someone who seems to have a PhD, but no one's ever going to verify that PhD. But because they're called doctor, must be an authority, they're saying something that I already have heard or I already believe. That confirmation bias kicks in, and you trust that source because it's talking to you in a language you understand, as opposed to your GP who doesn't represent you or doesn't feel like you got close to them in some way. Your environment makes a big difference. We're talking about physical environment here. If you are surrounded by 50 fast food stores, that normalizes fast food as a food option. And then suddenly it becomes very normal for you to grab a burger on the way home as opposed to grabbing healthy, cheap, healthy, fresh food or something like that. And we know there are suburbs, we know there are cities where this is a bigger problem. And this is all part of the market-based capitalist society that we're in. Free market allows companies to operate in a certain way, and they will congregate around, more likely than other, the more vulnerable populations. So I used to live in Auckland, and I lived in Howick, which was predominantly Pākehā population at the time. It's changed a little bit since then, but predominantly Pākehā population. I would do my PhD in Auckland University, and I would take the train from Glen Innes to the city, and that was my route. The number of fast food stores that I would see change from Howick through to Glen Innes alone was phenomenal. You would see the environment physically change, and you would see the patterns of behavior just naturally go. That normalizing effect your environment has. If you're in a family where everyone smokes, and you're the only one that doesn't smoke, you're the weird one. You know, you're not the one that's doing things right. You're in an environment where this is normalized. Therefore, the perceived consequences, like I said about driving, if you perceive the consequences to be low, or if you perceive the consequences of not doing something to be high, and those consequences don't necessarily need to be rational or to be evidence-based or anything, they're just perceived consequences. So if I quit smoking, would I still have a boyfriend or a girlfriend? That's actually a major, major consequence for a lot of people, especially young people we found when we're talking to young people. But then we'll have nothing to do because we always hang out and have a smoke together. Like, I'm sure you can think of something else to do, that other than smoking, and please don't, anyway. Something safe and healthy you can do. But smoking doesn't have to be the center of the relationship. But a lot of the young people that we spoke to in a study we did in the UK, they're like, but smoking was central to our connection, our social connection, and if I didn't smoke, I would be the one left out. When they stopped smoking, I was in the UK when they stopped smoking indoors, and I was the one who didn't smoke, and I was the one who would guard all the coats and the handbags and everything while everyone went outside and smoked and had their little fun party outside the restaurant now. And I'm like, don't smoke, kind of want to smoke, so at least I've got friends, you know. Now that's slowly changed, but if you're in a society where the environment in particular, that's happening and you're the one that's weird on the outside, that consequence is quite high. Past experience as well, have you tried this before, have you failed, have you succeeded, whatever else it might be. We know that's a huge barrier to people who are trying to change a behavior, alter a behavior, change their diet, change smoking, change sexual activity, whatever else we're talking about. If they've had a bad experience or they've heard of a bad experience and they've internalized that bad experience as being the truth from then on, very, very difficult to break through. And this is why, in my mind, a lot of the social marketing interventions really need to start early, before kids have had an opportunity to develop some sort of biased opinion of this, get into the primary schools and start talking about this stuff. And I know that sort of mucky is going on a regular basis, but we need to see that more rather than on TV or whatever else it might be. Okay, so why is it so difficult? I use this a lot when I'm talking about mental well-being and mental health interventions, and how it's very difficult to spot someone who may be struggling with a mental health issue. We all put on our suit and we're all happy, clappy and everything like that. Just to get an idea, is anyone frontline social worker or in the community, like GPs or anything like that? No, okay, so just so we know where we're at. If you're a GP talking to someone, they will come in and they'll talk about 5 things before they get to the 6th thing that they really want to talk about. And I think you kind of understand that, because everyone's wearing their armor, because there's so much stigma associated with things, because especially when you're going to talk to your health professional, a lot of people already feel like, I know I'm bad, I know this is wrong, I know I shouldn't be doing this, and it's really hard for me to own this and accept this and ask for help. So I often say, for men in particular, I love you is not the hardest 3 words to say, it's I need help. A lot of guys struggle to say I need help. Because a lot of guys want to try and do it themselves. Now, that's not always the case, but we need to try and break down that armor. We need to break this down, not to glorify health conditions, but to normalize asking for help to a point that people can honestly say, I've tried, I've not succeeded, but I'm going to keep trying, whatever else it might be. I have this thing called the Cone of Irrelevance. And this is where this sort of balance between effectiveness and reach and connection kind of changes. On the left-hand side, we've got your audience reached. You have lots of people being reached. The problem is, the more people you reach, the less relevant you become. If you really want to find really relevant interventions that matter to someone, then you need to be reaching people on a level that they understand. Now, that doesn't necessarily need to be one-to-one. We know one-to-one works really well. If you have a partner that you walk with this whole journey and they encourage you, fantastic. Not scalable, unfortunately. If you look at the sort of rates we have of obesity and overweight in New Zealand, you look at the rates we have with regards to smoking, domestic violence, whatever else you want to talk about, they are too high to have one social worker or one health professional for every person. However, one person creating an ad in Wellington and saying copy and paste that for every district health board and you should be fine, over on this left-hand side, is bollocks. Right? That doesn't work either. We need to find that happy middle ground. Ideally, you would have a little bit of work on the left-hand side so that people can be aware of the issue, and then you'd have lots of work in the middle, and then those people who are really active, ready to engage, ready to change, you have the more one-on-one or the small group sessions. And those things tend to work best. But it has to be all the way down. Reality is, on the left-hand side, a marketing agency can go and say, we reached 2.3 million households with this ad over a period of 6 months. And the government say 2.3 million people saw that ad, fantastic, sign them up, that's where we'll put our money. They never ask, did their behavior actually change for the positive? Did lives actually change to a point that their lives are extended? No, that's too hard to measure, it's far too complicated, but 2.3 million people saw it. 2.3 million people might have hated it, but that's all right, they saw it. We need to move down this way, okay, it's kind of went on. So what are the tensions? This first one I thought would be particularly relevant to the sort of things that Sophia had said you're concerned about. There is information overload, and not all that information is good information. My wife was fortunate enough to have breastfed both our daughters without too much of an issue, but there were still issues. If anyone has been a partner to someone who's breastfed or breastfed yourself, it's not the easiest thing to do, to get going. Once things get going, life becomes much easier, but it's a struggle. There is a lot of information she received from people who are qualified and a lot of people who weren't qualified. There are a lot of internet posts out there. We went through a lot of cabbage. I don't even know if that's true or not. Don't worry about it. We went through a lot of cabbage leaves. I don't know if that's true or not, but she read it somewhere and it made her feel better. So cabbage leaves it was. Okay. We tried all sorts. We tried dream feeding. We tried this. We tried all sorts of things that we would try because there's so much information. Now, we are both intelligent people, or well, we're educated people. I won't say we're intelligent. We're both educated people, and we're able to disseminate that down. But if you were vulnerable, you didn't have access to that information, or you didn't understand that sort of information, and someone very forceful said, this is what you need to do, people tend to trust it. A very good friend of mine, after she gave birth, she was struggling for the milk to come in. She had had twins, emergency C-section. Twins had come early, struggling for the milk to come in, and the nurse basically berated her, saying she's starving her kids, just give them formula. Now, this was a nurse. And now when a nurse is there saying your kids are dying because of your lack of ability, you need to give them formula, that was her view. Nurse was seen as an authority in this area, very forceful voice. Then that would be the sort of thing that a normal human being would probably adopt. My friend basically told her F off and said, I'm breastfeeding my children and that's what's going to happen, because she was a firm believer in this. So good on her, because the boys have grown up to be very strong. There is workload overload. Is anyone here bored in their job? Everyone got enough to do? Yeah. There's too much work. There is too much work, and so sometimes the simpler, easier solutions, the ones that say you can report back to the government and say, we reached this many people, rather than going back and saying, I'm going to hold my head up high, and 5 people have now quit smoking in my community, and those 5 people's lives have changed because they each have 3 kids, and there we've seen a flow-on effect that's going to matter. Because you're afraid the government will go, 5 people? Yeah, we're not going to fund that anymore. But those 5 people actually do matter, but that's a tension that we have here. Solutions do exist, but they aren't always accessed. It's very hard to get access to those. They tend to be very expensive, or they tend to be very difficult to put in place. Advertising, promotion, education is good for reach, but it doesn't change culture. Smoking, if this was 30, 40 years ago, I would suspect most of us would be smoking, and most of us would probably be smoking in this room. All right? The culture around smoking has changed, and it's not because of advertising. It's not necessarily because of the packet labels, and it's not necessarily because of the taxes. All of those things might have had an influence, but the biggest change is people have stopped seeing it as being cool. Now, the populations where it is still a big problem, we know it is a higher problem among certain populations around the world, it's still seen as a normal part of their culture. Young people smoke. Old people smoke. It is seen as an adult thing. It's seen as a cool thing, whatever else it might be. When that cultural attachment changes around an activity, a behavior, you will see behavior to flow much, much quicker. And this is where a lot of my work now is more about how do we affect culture rather than how do we advertise to people to educate them. Because education doesn't necessarily breed culture. So culture sits at the heart of the social change that I look at, and culture is complex and difficult to change. It's expensive, and it's demoralizing at times. I don't like changing culture, because culture in its truest sense, when we're talking about ethnic culture, national culture, very, very important. However, when we're talking about how there is a subculture or meanings associated with a practice, yes, you can change that. I remember the first time I worked with the World Health Organization, they said, we'd like you to go to Fiji and change the culture of eating. And I said, no, I'm not going to go over and change a nation's culture. I will go and understand why there is this fasting and feasting behavior, why it's becoming difficult to understand health promotion, blah, 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 blah. But I'm not going to go over there and say, hello, the white man is here. And for all intents and purposes, I was the white man over there, even though I'm Indian. The white man's here to tell you why you savages have done everything wrong, because that is how those messages come across. It's not empowering, it's not engaging. What I try to do now, I'll talk about this guy. You guys all know who this guy is. Can we or should we all become Dr. Lance Sullivan? I don't think we should all become Lance Sullivan, because we are all individuals, we are all empowered, we are all have our own access, we have our own talents. We don't need to all become Lance Sullivan. He does his work and he does it very well. There are elements of his work, though, that I think we can take away and we should be doing, and I'm sure you guys are all doing. But this idea that he is very community-centered, not necessarily individual-centered. How does this help the wider community? If that means upsetting this one person so that the wider community is benefited, so be it. Population-based work, a balance of time outside the clinic as well. So you do see him at more community events and cultural events and things like that. And the whole point of this is he's access-oriented and ready to call out misinformation. If you came out to an event and said, you guys are wrong, this is not true, but you'd never actually been part of that group, part of that culture, part of that community, you're always going to be seen as an outsider saying you're doing something wrong. The fact that his focus is so much on trying to build access and mana within that community, then when he does say something, people go, oh, well, if Lance says it, maybe we should believe it. When I was at university, I didn't like customer service. You know, most people take a job in waitressing, waitering, and I just don't like people enough. I couldn't do it. I really couldn't. I couldn't do it. So I did sales jobs, and I ran my own businesses and things like that. One of the first things you realize is that people would rather hear about the 1% change in your life than the 1,000% change in someone's life in America. They don't want to hear about that distant concept that may happen to someone over there. They want to hear about the real story that you have. Now, if you are able to express that story, be part of that, and humanize that experience with people, then you're able to do a far better, closer relationship with them as time goes on. And then when you do say stuff, you've already built that relationship, and that relationship means they're going to trust you much more when you do start suggesting things. But I want to talk about this thing called transformative consumer research. This is where most of my research is these days as well. How are we going for time? I need to hurry up. So, when do you guys need to leave? I'm meant to be here until 1 for lunch. What time is it? So we can go a little longer, right? Yeah, if you've got questions. All right. So transformative consumer research is a form of research that is very much focused on well-being and changing people's lives for the better. Now, this already ends up in an ethical and moral debate because what is right, what is for the better. But if we have got targets that we need to reach, such as increasing breastfeeding rates amongst our mothers, if we're decreasing smoking, alcohol abuse, that sort of thing, hopefully we can all agree those are things we want to do. It is focused on the consumer level. It is focused on that end user level rather than the macro level. Capacity building and ownership of the transformation, and it's a multi-tiered approach rather than a single option such as advertising or whatever else it might be. The very beginning, most of my work I start by talking with people. I don't even have an agenda. I don't go in. I just want to see what their experiences are, what their lives are like, what do they value, what motivates them, what drives them. Before I went into academia, I worked in corporate marketing for a while, and my marketing manager used to say, 80% of our job as marketers is understanding people. If you can understand what motivates people, drives people, and excites people, what people are scared of, all those sorts of things, then it becomes very easy for us to market products to them, because we just play off those feelings and those emotions. It was an awful, awful place to work, and it's kind of why I escaped after a couple of years. But still, the same sort of principle exists. If someone is inspired by something, we create that thing that is inspirational, and they get to take part in this journey rather than feel they have to take part in it. What drives them, what's important to them? The cup opera is built on the needs of the community, not your needs. You might have KPIs that's set from above, but if you go and say, I need to stop you smoking, how can I stop you smoking? They're going to say, well, this isn't something that I feel empowered or encouraged by. They're going to start saying, I don't want to be part of this. But if you go and say, what's your life like? What's something that you would like to see change? What's some sort of improvement? What are the things that's going on? And then use those values in order to drive change. Then life becomes easier. When I'm spending time in the community, this word why happens a lot. Why? I just want to get inside your head. I want to live in your lives. I want to spend time with you, and I want to build that connection. Now, the more time I do this, already I'm building that connection, that community orientation that makes my life easier, because people go, Akant's here, rather than, oh, that guy's here. And that has happened, okay? When people come in and say, I'm the researcher, I'm here to help you become better, they don't really want to be part of it. But if your friend's coming around, they're like, hey, Akant's coming around, we're going to spend some time with you. TCR is community oriented and actioned. If it doesn't empower the community, if the community is not sold out to this, if they're not encouraged by this, they're not going to carry on with this program once you've left, okay? If you always have to be involved to see the action happen, then in my mind, you are not going to be pulling on those levers that are going to make the change long lasting. Because as soon as you change or your funding changes or whatever, then you've lost a lot of the momentum that has been built up. So it has to be driven by that community. TCR doesn't aim to educate, it aims to make people care. The focus is on making people care Most people know. Most people understand. And if they don't, it doesn't take long to educate. It says, here is the stuff that really matters. And I can prove it to you because you're living this experience. Blah, 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 blah. And logic and scientific data is only important if the community values it. And to be honest, most of the communities I deal with, logic, scientific information does not matter to them. They don't understand it. It is disenfranchising. It's disempowering. They don't like it. That doesn't mean I don't use that, but I use that and I filter it through in a form that hopefully is understood and accepted and adopted. But I don't go and say, have you not read The Lancet today? God's sake, people, what are you doing with your time? You know, The Lancet said there's a 0.23% increase, and that's at a P level of 0.01. That's really significant. It's not going to connect, right? All right? Using language that they understand, using language and inspiring them on a level that they understand, it's going to make life much easier. Let me give you one very, very quick example. I was asked to talk to a few high schools in the UK when I was a lecturer out in the UK. They had a real problem with smoking in their schools. The school was really upset about the brand image of kids in uniform smoking, all right? I was more upset about kids smoking. I didn't care whether they're in uniform or not. It was more about the kids smoking. So I said yes. And they said, yeah, so could you put up some ads and stop them smoking? I'm like, not really. That's not how it works. I would like to talk with the kids at your school. And so I spent the first maybe 2 or 3 months of that project just talking to the kids in school, spending time in focus groups, so spending time with multiple people in a room, spending time with individuals as well, and just chatting to them. Didn't even talk about smoking for the first month or 2 at all. Just what are the things that inspired them? Now, young people, we're talking about 13 to 18-year-olds, 13 to 16-year-olds more, and they may be different from Kiwis, but there's some generic themes that came through. They're in a bit of flux in their life. They're still young, and they're seen as young, but they are starting to push back, and they want to be masters of their own universe, and they want to be seen as independent, and they want to be seen as having empowerment and having a voice of their own. They also care about what other people think, but they will tell you they don't care about what other people think, which is fantastic. And so I kind of lent on those things in particular. One of the things that they said that they hated more than anything is especially when older people lie to them. They hated being taken for granted or felt that they're gullible or not taken seriously, those sort of things. So I put together a video of tobacco executives basically testifying under oath saying, smoking's not bad for you, smoking's not addictive, all these sorts of things. We had one guy, this is a clip from the 80s, and even though it was very old, it still resonated with him. He said, it's true that smoking might cause a woman to have a smaller baby, but some women might want a smaller baby, okay? And so we had this clip in there. And at the end, we just had the tagline, every time you smoke, you're believing their lies. Don't be so gullible, all right? It killed smoking in those schools so quickly, because we drew off the things that inspired those kids, not, oh my God, your lungs are going to look like that. A 13-year-old doesn't care what their lungs look like. An 18-year-old doesn't care what, probably most 33-year-olds don't care what their lungs look like, all right? You don't see them, they're not in top of mind, they're not salient, all right? But feeling like you were being lied to and you were gullible really hurt those kids, and they stopped. Now, I didn't go back and say, one ad, and you guys quit smoking, you guys are super gullible. That that would have undone all the hard work. But effectively, it kind of was. But that's how I kind of try to apply this sort of mahi in the way that I do. Okay, so why does bad information get spread and why does it get adopted? There are people spreading it are part of it. The people that tend to spread bad information have a relationship with those people, or they speak a language that they understand. They're encouraging, they're empowering, they're inspirational, all these sorts of things. Make people feel part of a community, they make people feel empowered. They're usually very loud as well. Okay? You see them in the press, you see them at council meetings, you see them wherever else it might be. The people receiving it are also part of the problem as well. They typically don't necessarily have access to decent information, and if they don't have access, even if they do have access to it, don't necessarily have the capacity to understand it. We don't see a lot of people adopting things when they have a PhD, when it's bad information, because they know how to disseminate good information from bad information. I also say, and I should be careful with this, I do know people who are anti-vaccination. They're very staunch anti-vaccination. And I keep telling them, do you know where there's no anti-vax movement? India, my home country. You go to my home country and they queue up for vaccinations because they know how debilitating those diseases are. They've seen the effects of polio, they've seen the effects of typhoid, they've seen the effects of measles, which was effectively gone up until a couple of flipping years ago. They see those effects, and whenever you see a UN cart or a UNICEF cart or anything turn up with vaccinations, people queue up and they say, jab my kid multiple times, all right? Because their experiences are very different from some of the experiences in New Zealand. There aren't, when people start saying, no one's died of measles in ages, that's how vaccines work, you idiot, all right? You can't say that, because it's not, okay. But people die in India of vaccines all the time. All right, I want to talk very quickly about the All Right campaign. The All Right campaign is a campaign that's been run in Christchurch for a number of years. It was funded out of the earthquakes, but it's carried on running in that space. I've been on the All Right board for, I think, since 2013 or something like that, and I still am in regular contact with them. Now their advisory board is kind of dissolved. But this is how they started. This is how they started, with these very bright, cartoony sort of colors, and they were just meant to be trying to improve well-being in the community by encouraging more connection. You all know the 5 ways to well-being, so staying connected is one of them, and they wanted to, they had little rip-off things. These worked really well for a small group in society. Typically worked really well for women, typically worked really well for Pākehā. Did not connect super well with men. Some men got into it. I got into it because I was unashamed of this sort of thing. I'm quite happy to give someone a compliment. It did not connect well with our Māori and Pacific population at all, okay? And they were really concerned, like, we're not reaching this population. It's a smaller population in Christchurch than it is up here, but it's still a population that was of concern. So they went back to the community. We went back and we talked to people. They had long chats with what their values are, what they would like to see. And guess what? It wasn't bright colors. And this is the new campaign that they launched. Very much focused on whānau, very much focused on using the language that matters to the people, very much focused on culture, very much focused on empowerment, all those sorts of things. And we found that this really resonated much, much better. We spoke with a few of the younger people in the community as well, Māori people in the community as well, and said, who do you talk to when you're stressed out? Who do you get a chance to? And sometimes it's friends, but typically what they said is it's auntie. Not mom and dad, but it's auntie. Every young kid has an auntie and they need an auntie. And so we had to put a couple of aunties in there, you know, because you know what, and if you know any aunties, then they don't always smile like that. They might click around the ear as well, but sometimes you need that, all right? But we needed a couple of aunties in there as well, because that was something that resonated with them. And we didn't go out and say, go and find your auntie and talk to them. That's too in your face, and people aren't stupid. But if you can create some messaging that makes people feel connected, part of the community, and resonates with them and make them feel empowered, it's more likely going to work for them. Final couple of things I want to talk about. I want to talk about modeling behavior very quickly. People might not listen to what you say, but they will follow what you do. If you're not living this life, then it's going to be very difficult for them to carry on with it. If you're saying, do as I say, not as I do, it's not great modeling behavior. And being part of the community matters, and more than being a leader in the community. If you have a title and say, this person is our MP, people aren't going to trust your MP, okay? They are separated from us. But if someone is like, wow, I see that person at every school fair, or I see that person at every community event, whatever else it might be, then they're more likely going to respect what you've got to say. Now that's a very different change, again, over the last 40, 50 years, where we would ultimately respect people because of their title and their education. That is absolutely gone. You respect people because of the connection that they've built with you now. So and if you do say something, your doctor says something, well, that's because the doctor has sold out to Big Pharma. Again, this bit misinformation. The importance of language as well. I've spent enough time with clinicians and with, I've broken your label, I've been fiddling with that. I've spent enough time with clinicians and people in the DHBs to know I have no idea what you're saying half the time. You love acronyms. You love speaking in contractions, and you just assume everybody understands that. It is really disenfranchising for educated people coming in to work with you. So just imagine how it must feel when it goes to people that you're working with in the community who maybe have no background in this, all right? Now, I'm not saying you use that language, but you know what? If you use it so casually amongst yourselves, it does filter through when your casual conversations happen lower down. If you start talking about GI rates or anything like that, I don't know what that is. So appropriate language needs to be used to destigmatize and bolster the community and their identity, but again, not at a rate that glorifies the condition. We don't want people glorifying it. I've got plenty of examples of how language glorifies, but we won't do it now. The last thing I think I want to talk about, we'll see if this is the last thing, is this idea that micro-communities of support matter more than macro-communities of attention. Facebook is a macro-community of attention. I'm stressed, I want you to pay attention to me, okay? Or I am dealing with this, someone give me attention. Having a small group of trustworthy people, half a dozen people max, that will always check up on you, and you don't necessarily need to go and ask for help, they know when you need help. That has always been seen to be far more effective, but it means that they have to be more close physically, they need to be trustworthy, they need to spend time with you, they need to know how to do this, blah, 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 blah. Again, coming back to this community spirit side, being drawn together. This becomes very difficult though. Very, very difficult, because it means being hands-on. It means spending time and hours and days and years with people. Macro communities of attention, saying, we're going to reach 500 people with this message. Fantastic to let people know, not great to change behavior. Kind of makes sense? They can go hand in hand though. I'm not saying that one is completely useless, definitely better hand in hand. So, blah, 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 blah. So how do you promote better health? This is where I wanted to kind of finish and allow you guys to speak. Know your target audience better than you know yourself. There's a little bit of Art of War from Sun Tzu as well. If you want to know how to change people's lives for the better, then you need to spend some time understanding what drives them, what motivates them, and you know it's not the same thing that drives and motivates you. All right? It is going to be different, so you need to get inside their heads and live their lives, understand what their fears are, and things like that. Don't just look to build knowledge, over-reliance on media, blah, blah, blah. We've already said all this, so I'll stop. I want to finish with one quick anecdote, though. Younger days in my research, I remember going on this big drive to understand why people don't cook at home. Why are you spending time and money at McDonald's when you could create something healthier, cheaper, better tasting at home? And I had this idea, that was the value in my mind, that people are wasting their time and money. And I sat down with this one lady, and I said, and she said she takes her kids, her 4 kids to McDonald's every single week, and that's their weekly thing. I'm like, why? Don't you know it's cheaper to do this? Don't you know it's easier to do this? And she said something very profound, and it kind of stuck with me, and it kind of hurts that it was so profound, and it's hard to break through. She said, I don't have much money. I work 60 hours a week for very little money, and every time my kids ask for new sneakers, I say no. Every time they ask for a skateboard, I say no. Every time they want to go on school camp, I have to say no. Every time they want to go on holiday, I say no. When they say, can we go to McDonald's, I can say yes. I'm allowed to say yes, and if I can bring some bit of yes into their lives, and if it happens to be crappy food, I can say yes to my kids. I'm like, shit, I can't break that. I won't break that. You are allowed to say yes to your kids. Now, how do we do that? How do we bring that feeling of being able to be powerful for your kids, to say yes to your kids, but in a way that doesn't kill your kids at a young age, you know what I mean? McDonald's is powerful. All fast food chains are powerful. Sugar is powerful, not just physically, but the money behind it is powerful. Really, really difficult to come out and say, this is bad for you because Pepsi's budget to market sugary drinks to you is 5 times the budget of the entire health system, something. So it's really, really difficult to break that down. And so those feelings and those emotions associated with those products become very difficult to break, but sometimes we should be okay to allow people to do it because their value is I get to say yes to my kids. So we have to try and understand those values, and from there put our biases aside and build something from that. So that's, I think, I should check what I want to say. Oh yeah, great. So do you have questions, comments? I'm happy to.